Hi, this is Manjula Narayan, books editor, Hindustan Times, and I have with me Ben Okri, Man Booker Prize winner. And so we're just going to have a conversation. And let's start with your use of folklore and myths and legends, and the idea of dream logic, which you've spoken about.
Well, it's only because I'm interested in conveying life in all of its levels. Many of the books when I was growing up that were supposed to be the models of how to write seemed to me not to be catching the levels of reality that I saw in Nigeria when I was growing up. And I wanted all of those levels. And one of those levels is folklore, is myth. People are not just the things they do in the streets, they're also the stories they tell themselves. They're also the stories they grew up with, the stories their mothers told them. So our realities is also impacted on by all of these invisible things. And I wanted those things in the stories I told. And it took me a long time to find the right kind of voice by which to have all of those levels at once. So you didn't have one bit followed by another bit, which is endlessly sequential. I wanted it to be impacted and seamless.
Okay, there are so many great Nigerian writers, and well, the scene in India is also okay, but
It's a great scene in India.
yeah, well, so how come there isn't more given like post-independence politically, the non-aligned movement and stuff like that? How come there isn't more interaction between Indian writers and Nigerian writers specifically, and generally African writers? I mean, since we do have the colonial past in common,
It's a very, very good question, and I'm very surprised by it myself, because we have so much in common, quite apart from the whole colonial business and the whole British business. Let's forget all that. We actually, there's a great similarity to the richness of our lives. Even our myths have a lot in common. In the earlier days, in the 50s and the 60s, there was more intermingling between African and Indian writers. Yes. And I think it's because they felt more solidarity with one another. And I think post-independence, the very fact of independence has somehow divided us, separated us, which is very sad. Personally, I've got a lot of Indian writer friends, and I've always had a deep feeling for India, and India's had a lovely deep feeling for me. So that's not my own personal problem, but I do think that both cultures were missing something in not having a greater conversation with one another. Yes. Purely from a point of view of politics and of our relationship to the rest of the world. Yes. I think we should come together much more, instead of constantly trying to forge links with America or China or Britain. I think we should strengthen the links between us, because we understand where we are in the world and what we have to do to change our game. And we have to help one another. I miss cultural conversations. One of the things that's lovely about being in London is that you have these conversations a lot with people like Salman Rushdie and Vikram, and when I come here, people like Shashi Tharoor. But I want more of it. I think we're diminished without it.
Okay, so since you are in India, who's your favorite Indian writer?
Oh, I'm not gonna get into the game of favorites. I'm not gonna get into the game of favorites, especially as you've got so many wonderful writers right now, and for some time. Indian writing's kind of exploding.
Yes.
There's a great, real hunger and diversity
Yes.
of styles and voices and forms of storytelling. You're just rich with writers. So I'm not gonna.
So I can't trap you like that. Okay, so talk like when you were the first question I asked you touched on dream logic. So talk a bit more about that since that's the core.
What dream logic? Well, the 19th century fiction, on the whole, there are one or two exceptions, tended to be very lateral, tended to be very, for want of a better word, horizontal, driven by kind of logic, the cerebral logic, the 1 + 1 = 2 logic. But there's another logic that actually works in storytelling, and has worked in storytelling from the most ancient of times. But I am personally interested in what I call dream logic, because I think that fiction doesn't just tell you about the world that you think you see. It also tells you about the world that you experience, that you don't know you're experiencing. And our level of the experiencing of reality is so multidimensional that most of the time we're not aware of it. Yeah? If you ask somebody who walks down the street, if you ask them what they saw walking down the street, they won't be able to tell you everything they saw. They'll choose.
Yes.
And their choice would seem random, but it's not random. They've chosen what has spoken to their subconscious, what has spoken to their spirit. The same is true with fiction. When we read very personally. We read from our subconscious. We read from our neurosis.
Yes.
So our experience of reality is not logical. Our experience of reality is almost dreamlike. And I've been exploring this for the last 25 years. It really means taking the boat, the nuts and bolts of fiction, and rearranging it in a new way. And it also means finding a new tone and a new art, a new craft. It just makes my life more difficult, which is fun.
Okay, I think that should be it.